Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Benson. I'm the president of the California Choral Directors Association, and welcome to our living rooms. I'm happy to see you all on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon on the West Coast. I am excited to introduce you to our fantastic panelists today. Another afternoon with 5 really great people. First, Dr. Derek Fox from the University of Nebraska, Omaha is joining us. Dr. Troy Robertson from Tarleton State University in Texas, near Dallas, Fort Worth area, and also founding member of Core Amor, which he'll talk a little bit about later today. Eliza Rubenstein from Orange Coast College and from our fabulous CCDA board, our Cantate News magazine editor. Genevieve Tepp from Carlmont High School, and Dr. Casey Robinson, the principal of a secondary school on the East Coast, one of my dear friends, and someone who I thought would give us some great perspective as a junior high and high school administrator, who is not a choral person, but I think has some great perspective to add to the conversation today about advocacy and thinking about our art and choral music and music in general, and how that's going to fit into the current situation that we're in right now and in the fall. So welcome panelists, and as always, Trish Adams, thank you so much for being here and hosting the Zoom meeting for us. I'm going to start with Dr. Derek Fox. I think what we wanted to start a little bit with on our conversation today is a continuation of last week with regards to advocacy and what we can be doing to be sort of positive and out front of the narrative, and thinking about ways that we can really sort of continue to, as Ethan Sperry said, sort of fight for our jobs and for our positions. So Derek, would you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the choral collective that you've started, and some of the advocacy work that you think is important?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it. If there's anything that I say, because sometimes I'll talk really, really fast, you can shoot me an email and I'll try to get back to you and clarify. I'm also going to share a link with you in the chat function so that you can find the documents that I'm talking to you about today. So I'll give you just a really quick history. What I started was this thing called the Professional Choral Collective, a totally, completely made up name that I did the day after the NATS ACDA / et al. Everybody's conference, the thing that kind of set some people on fire. And I thought, okay, what can I do? What's my next step? That information is something that invigorated me to figure out what my next step might be. And I thought, I'm not in this alone unless I choose to be in this alone. And I also thought, the narrative that's out there around choral music can be driven by people outside of music or people inside of music, and what work can we do to begin to drive that narrative from inside? Because if the people outside hear from the people inside that choral music is over, then why should they think differently? And so those are some of the catalysts for the work that I've been doing with a lot of people who've decided to come on board and just try to be open and kind of a no shame, no blame. If you don't know, you're willing to jump in there and try. And so this Professional Choral Collective has come about. And right now there are about 409 people who signed up. And out of that, probably about 150 or so, maybe 100 people have felt really comfortable saying that they had some ideas. And then I went back to those people and asked them to formulate those ideas a little bit more in a way that anybody who read this form could read it and then modify it to fit into their room, because we all understand that our communities are different. And there is no ready-made lesson plan that will travel from room to room to room and be ready to roll out for you to use immediately. It takes a little bit of work to make that fit. And so it's with that spirit that this has all come about. And so far we've collected about 48 different lessons, strategies that can be used one day, or that can be used across a longer period of time. And so I'm going to share with you, if I can work this magical Google machine, this link that you can follow along if you'd like to. Oh, sorry, you can follow along if you'd like to. You can go back and look at it later. Let me see if I can get this to work for you, to everyone. And in there, I will continue to update all of these documents. So the way this works is, if you're interested in being a part of this work, and if you're interested, if you have a lesson that you think will easily transfer to someone else's classroom, you basically go to this form called the Future Teaching Practices submission form, and you write it out. And I lead you through that in a way that hopefully will make it very easy. Oh, you can't see that because I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Perfect. Can you see that now? All right. It leads you through the process of how to share your lesson or share your idea or share your strategy so that we can figure out how to help each other pivot however we may need to when we get back in the fall. Some of us may be in class, some of us may be doing a hybrid. I know at my own university, we are asked to do something in person that could also be done hybrid in person online, that could also at the drop of a dime be done all online. And so we have to have all of those processes in place because we will no longer have the buffer of 2 weeks like we did this year to make that transition happen. It will be, the chancellor says at 8 o'clock on Monday night that we have to be online Tuesday morning, and everything goes immediately online. And so these lessons are to give you the opportunity to see what some of your colleagues around the country are talking about. Within that folder, you'll see, and I don't have to share this, hopefully you can follow along. Within that folder, I've divided them into different categories. There's middle school, junior high, high school, collegiate, community, semi-professional, church. Some of those areas I don't teach in, but I still ask people in those areas to submit some things because they may spark something within you that you connect with your work in that area, so that we have some things to talk to administrators about, or so that we have some artifacts to be able to show our administrators, this is what I'm currently working on, so that whenever this gets onto your plate, I'm ready to have as much of an informed discussion as I can. I talked earlier about there's a lot of science happening right now, and it's going to continue to happen and change and unfold in many ways. But what won't change is that our students will still need to have music education. And so you can bank on that as your anchor into this discussion, because the science will continue to be controversial or changing, and we are not, I'm not a scientist in that way. And so I hang my hat on the things that I know I can control, and that's what happens in my classroom. And so these are just a few tools that hopefully you'll be able to find useful. I'll share with you a couple of other things before I have to give away the screen. Let's see, I'm not sure how to share anymore. Have I been sharing my screen that entire time? Okay.
No.
So within this document, I would also like to point out for you this one particular document, Word doc, that has some additional resources that I went and searched on my own. Some different apps, some different things. And I try to make sure through this collective that I give credit to the people who gave the idea. So when you go into these documents, you're going to see who submitted the idea. So if you have any questions about how to execute that particular lesson, then you reach out to that particular person who submitted that idea, because part of this too is also teaching us to communicate with each other, not just within our districts, but outside of our districts. I'll say this to wrap up. Just because some of us aren't asked to present at multiple conferences or do 50,000 all-state choirs a year, that doesn't mean we don't have anything special to add, or we don't have anything that may spark creativity in someone else's life to help them in their classrooms. And so this is a platform that really kind of equals the playing field amongst us as colleagues. It doesn't necessarily equalize the playing field for our students, because we recognize that we have students who come from different backgrounds, who need different things. But in terms of us as educators, this is a chance for us to be in a room and sit at a table or create spaces at a table for all of us to speak from our own experience, so that someone else can look at you and say, hey, I like that idea. My classroom has 92 treble voices. How can I make that work in this situation? So it's about figuring out how to pivot, how to shift, because as my friend Kari Gilbertson from Texas says, shift happens. And that's what this is about. If you have any other questions beyond that, you can ask me. I guess there'll be time, but I'm going to turn the table back over to Jeffrey so the next person can speak.
Awesome, thanks, Derek. We'll definitely have more time for Derek to share out some other things. Troy Robertson is doing some similar work with Core Amor in his work there. And Troy, I'd love for you to share some of the stuff that you're doing there, and specifically the advocacy documents that your team has put together for sort of communicating out sort of ahead of this as much as we can, and you know, I know you and I just recently talked about just even locally me advocating to my community chorus about, even though we're not going to be meeting regularly, I'm still the artistic director of that organization, and I would still like for us to move forward with some projects. So advocating to my board and talking with you has really been something that, you know, I've learned from Choral more as well. You're muted, sir.
Didn't want to interrupt Derek. Yeah, so the initial idea behind Choral was to try to get on top of the virtual choir thing, because I had heard folks saying this takes a really long time, and my instinct was that that might not be correct, that people could probably move faster if they adjusted their goals and their planning. And so a big part of what we've started out doing is training how to do the score creation, the audio portion, the video portion. We just had a training today. There's another one tomorrow. There's another one Thursday. And so we've got folks cooperating to offer those trainings and to create slides. We're also going to be archiving some of those trainings. So the first one to be archived will be the one that took place today, so you can watch at your leisure. And then the sort of second prong of our attack is the performance element, because I think one of the best ways to get to know the process for this distance learning is to do it. And so there are lots of opportunities to perform. We've got some composers who are really excited about writing for the group. We also have folks who are generating materials that would be in the public domain. I know many of you are concerned about copyright issues, and so we can walk you through how to use elements that are already in the public domain from sources like Choral Wiki, and then also how to create materials on your own. So we're dealing with performance and generating resources for your own repertoire, because I know many of you are worried about that, both in terms of the legal issues, but also just finances, because our budgets are likely going to be slim to none. And then Jeffrey mentioned the advocacy part of this. That's grown kind of rapidly as we've, as Derek mentioned, been concerned about our jobs and get conflicting information day by day. We had a great report about upcoming research, but then we've also had major universities that have said we're not going to meet in person again until 2021. Cambridge just came out with that, so that seems very scary. So we have, you know, this roller coaster of emotions, as Derek mentioned. We don't know what's going to happen. The science seems to be changing. So figuring out how to advocate for ourselves. We've got in there a memo for sort of a larger institution, a letter for a community type institution, a letter to singers for a community type institution. We have a kind of a public facing statement that you might consider for your social media posts. I know all of us are concerned that we present the best possible face to the world and we make the conversation as positive as it can be. So those are the types of documents that are in the advocacy part of this. And then the last part of it that we're moving on to is generating, in addition to the files and the trainings, also generating some of those methods. I hope we'll be collaborating with all interested, and certainly I hope you contribute to Derek's project so that we can see your methods and what you have in mind. And then the other part of that we're trying to separate out just a little bit is it's been sort of surprising and disappointing how many folks have been left out in the cold to sort of figure out what to do around safety guidelines on their own. And so one of the things we're trying to do is not to make recommendations, because again, just as Derek said, none of us are scientists as far as I know. So we're passing along information from those of us who have the benefit of being part of a much larger system or institution, so that those resources can be spread to folks who don't have guidance that's really solid. And so that's not us giving advice, that's us being sort of a pass-through for those resources. So I think Jeffrey mentioned that I might be able to send him some of these links. There's kind of a lot, and so right now all of it's hosted in various Google Drive folders, just like Derek shared. But we're going to be putting up a website here soon and have some of those resources on that website as well. If you want to be a part of it, if you're interested, again, I keep saying, echoing Derek, but it's same exact philosophy. We want you to get credit for your work. We also want you to feel empowered to be part of the effort. And so if there's something you want to do, we have lots of folks who are volunteering to take part. Dr. Alan Zabriskie is heading up the safety guidelines compilation. Dr. Sandy Babb volunteered with Aaron Millard to to take up the methods portion of this. And then lots and lots of folks are working on generating resources for guide tracks, virtual choir, that kind of thing, as well as performance opportunities. So it's kind of a lot. If any of that sounds intriguing to you, you can email me at troydavidrobertson@gmail.com. So again, that's troydavidrobertson@gmail.com. I saw a question about how it was spelled. Choramore is C-H-O-R, Amor, A-M-O-R.
Troy, would you mind putting in the chat the link to, you've got a Google form where people can sign up to be on your news. Troy sends out a weekly newsletter on Choramore, and every week he updates it with events going on and virtual choirs and all kinds of things. So could you also, in addition to having people email you, could you put the link in the chat here so people can just click on the Google form and fill out?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put in the newsletter so you can sort of see what it looks like when we're detailing events that are coming up, and then I'll put the membership form after that. Whoever's talking next, pardon me, because I'll just slip off screen for a minute to do that. So.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Troy. And I'll say I was in the camp with Eliza of over my dead body, would I ever do a virtual choir?
I didn't say that.
You didn't say quite that. I probably said that, and I just want to give Eliza credit. But I have to say that Troy and Choramore have, with their training over the last couple of weeks, and the ability to sort of create the click track for the singers, it changed my perspective on how the ability to do it in a way that won't take me 5,000 hours. I just am grateful for the work that everybody's doing, but sort of from the Choramore aspect, the training sessions have been invaluable, and the community building has been invaluable. So thank you for that. I want to continue the conversation of advocacy for just a second. Troy, would you also be willing to just sort of share even just the one advocacy document so people could just look at it and see what type of template you're looking at? I think it would be nice for people to see that today, and so they can kind of see once you've got the website up and rocking and rolling, it'll draw.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do a series of links with each one. And are you going to send out a transcript of the meeting? Maybe I'll just have them there, and yeah, perfect. And I'll send you another email as well. So.
Wonderful, thanks, Troy. Dr. Casey Robinson, as I mentioned, is the principal at a secondary school, 6th through 12th grade program on the East Coast in Arlington, Virginia, and has been the principal there for several years. And although she's not a musician or a choral person per se, she's a big fan of all of ours. And something that we talked about on Saturday, Casey, really struck a chord with me in terms of, give us a little bit of perspective as the high school or middle school administrator brain, and what you're balancing, and sort of the world that we are absolutely immersed in right now is all quarantine music all the time. And I just would love to hear your perspective about this, especially with regard to advocacy.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to be a part of this. I've just been jotting a few notes. So I'm definitely not a part of the choral music community, but we do have a strong choral music program at my school. And I have to say, even though choral music is a huge part of our school, unless Jeff Benson was not my best friend, I wouldn't know that anything had come out from the CDC or that ACDA had said anything about the future of singing being any different than any other discipline in my school. And so I say that partly just to give some perspective, that I would say, and this is from a K-12 perspective, not a university point of view, but I am not thinking about choral music in a different way than I am any other subject area. There are constraints for every subject area, and so in terms of advocacy, I know this is different in different districts, but I wouldn't come with a, fighting for our jobs perspective. It's more like coming with, here's, how choral music is going to look at our school this year, whether we're distance or social distancing, but in person. And just being on this call for 20 minutes, you guys are far ahead of many other disciplines. I've always said to Jeff that I've never seen any other group of teachers that are more connected than choral music teachers. You know, I don't think I ever have been to a professional conference in the same way that every single year, Jeff and our current chorus teacher go to ACDA every year. They go to VMEA every year. And just the kinds of things that Troy and Derek are putting together. You know, I know that my theater teacher is in no way connected with other theater teachers thinking in this way. And they're going to have the same constraints in many ways that choral music is. So, and similarly, at least where we are in terms of instrumental music, there's just not this kind of collective, collaborative work happening on what choral music could look, what their discipline could look like in the future. So I just provide that as a little bit of context that while you all are thinking about choral music, I don't think that school districts or individual schools are thinking in any kind of negative way about the future of choral music. That's probably not even on people's administrators' radar yet, that choral music would be any different. And in our pre-call on Saturday, Troy said that, and I think it's really true, that we shouldn't be setting choral music aside in a different way, because every discipline, many disciplines are going to be changing in the coming year. So just to keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. Yeah, you know, I think sometimes we can get so myopic, and I think what we're doing is great and sort of worrying and stressing about making sure that we get out in front of this narrative. But the broader perspective of thinking about Casey managing and juggling 100 different teachers in her building, and all of their individual needs, of the science teacher freaking out about how she's going to be able to manage, you know, lab partners and things like that, and to the theater teacher and all of those things. So it struck me when Casey said that on Saturday of like, oh yeah, we are better and stronger when we collaborate with our colleagues in all of the fields, because we're not the only ones who are going to be affected by this. Speaking of collaboration, before I'm going to turn over this to Genevieve and Eliza in just a second, but I want to share with you, if you haven't seen this link, the National Federation of State High School Associations is just one of the commissioning and collaborating partners of this new study that the University of Colorado Boulder is commissioning. National organizations like NAFME, the National Association for Music Education, and ACDA, and the College Band Directors Association have all signed on. And this is something that is unbelievably exciting for us in terms of an actual study that can be, scientific study that can be replicated to really find out some answers. Because as we know, that webinar a couple of weeks ago was too, you know, I'm not a scientist, I am not a science denier for sure, but we also, the science is changing on a daily or weekly basis. As somebody pointed out in our call on Saturday of this weekend, you know, the CDC originally told us not to wear masks, and then we were told to wear masks. And the fact that from one week to the next, we don't actually know what recommendations we need to follow until they're right in front of us. This science is going to be a replicable study, and it's going to have peer reviews, and we're really excited about this. So I just share that with you there in the chat, the nfhs.org article. Eliza, will you share a little bit about your resource? Eliza's got some brilliant ideas for pulling together some written word resources. These webinars have been great, but I know many of us don't always retain best from just hearing people talk at us. So Eliza's got some great ideas coming up.
Sure. First of all, I want to be really clear. I have nothing against virtual choir. What I was objecting to was my 400 non-musical friends asking me if I'd ever heard of virtual choir. That's what I was tired of. So I am planning to do a virtual choir in the fall, but I'm also really glad that by then I will have had some time to either collect the skills that I need to do it, or collaborate with people who already have those skills so that I can spend my time on other things. And that's actually sort of connected to one of the reasons that I'm here today. Most of you are California people, and I hope that you already received in your mailbox. I'm going to put the link in the chat here. If you didn't, it's a link to the most recent Cantate magazine, which a bunch of us threw together in record time so that we would have an early written resource to get us going in this strange new era. And it's sort of, what's sort of amazing about that is that it came out early April and it already feels rather charmingly out of date, because that's the world that we live in right now. But we are planning already. Normally our next issue of Cantate would come out in like early October. But what we're going to do this year instead, and we're going to ask all of you to, we hope, contribute to this. We're going to have that issue of Cantate published, we hope, in August instead, and make it a resource book, because I think a lot of us are struggling if we're planning to do choir online for the fall. I personally am. I can come up with, you know, a lot of stuff to do, but I may reach my limit at some point and feel like I haven't hit on the great idea that's going to make this week really work, or I'm just out, you know, I'm just ideaed out. But one of the amazing things about this choral community, as a couple of people have already said, is that we're lots of creative people. We all get along really well. And in my experience, we are remarkably non-territorial about our ideas, especially in a time of crisis. So what we're going to be asking you to do, and there will be an email going out and some social media about this, we're going to ask you just to contribute 1 or 2 or 3 of your best ideas, your best weird teaching ideas, whether that means fully online teaching or whatever you are doing to adapt to this. It could be an idea for a project that worked really well for your students, something you're planning to do in the fall, a collaboration that you undertook. We'll make this very simple. We'll have just like a Google form that you can fill out and send in. And we're going to collect that into what we hope will be an incredible book of resources that will arrive in your mailbox in August. So, so that on those days when you are feeling unmotivated, you can open to any page and you'll have something to do today. So look for that, and we hope you got something out of the last issue, and we know you'll get lots out of the next one.
Awesome, thanks, Eliza. I know Genevieve Tepp has some really fantastic resources that she's putting together for her curriculum for the fall. I think she got excited this weekend and put together, you know, the next year's worth of cool stuff, as only the brilliant Genevieve is able to do somehow. Jen, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I get these late night, like, okay, I just gotta like fix this thing kind of moods, manic episodes going on or whatever. And what I basically did a little bit of, and I just sort of like put it out on Facebook a couple weeks ago, was like, okay, we're all sad, we can't sing together for a while, okay, fine, so like let's move on, what do we do now? And in the meantime, I've really been thinking about like, what do I actually do? Because this few weeks that we've been teaching online, and I have been out of school since the 12th of March, I believe. We're on like day 68 of quarantine or something like that around here. And it's been rough going, but I figured out some stuff that sort of does work. And so I sat down last night and quickly sort of outlined the entire first semester, assuming that we're online and doing distance learning that entire time. I don't know that we will be, but I've gotten instruction from my administration to plan on at least the first month of school being online. The other reason I'm doing this is because it will be very easy for me and probably all of you to pivot back to the classroom, because that's what we do and that's what we're used to. I feel like it's a lot harder to, I'll just plan like everything's normal, and then, you know, we have 1 week of school and then we're told to be, just like Derek was talking about, like getting an 8 o'clock email that says, okay, we're out for 2 more weeks or something. So I'm just sort of planning the first semester around distance learning. And so there's a few things. I'm gonna make fun of my type A tendencies as much as you guys want. I'm going to share my screen with you. And I can share this doc with everybody too. Like Eliza said, I'm the least territorial person about all this stuff, but this is basically my first semester, and I have a very large public high school, 2,400 kids we're supposed to have on campus next fall, which just can't happen. It can't happen in a normal year. It's too many kids. With this going on, it's a lot of kids. I've got about 150 kids in 5 different classes. So I always theme out everything anyway. My kids never talk about the winter concert or the Pops concert. They talk about breaking barriers, and they talk about the evolution of pop, and they talk about hope, and they talk about, you know, Bach to the Future and all these cheesy things. So I'm just going to theme the entire semester making history, and I think that's pretty easy to figure out why for the kids. And we're going to do just an enormous amount of learning and music making around music history. So some basic stuff that I'm going to be doing. I've been using Sight Reading Factory for a couple of years now, and I've been using it really intensively as sort of the meatiest bit of what I'm doing when we all of a sudden, like on Saturday morning, knew that we weren't coming back on Monday. And my kids have improved humongously. And as I'm checking in with them, it's even one of the things that they say that they like doing. So I'm going to keep doing that. Overall arching huge community building projects led by student leadership. I have a really great sound engineer who can mix remote recordings for us all year, share those with the community just like we would if we were doing a concert. I always provide voice tracks for the kids, which has made things a little bit easier for them. Like I've done it myself, so they're just singing along with me, which I think feels easier to them. And except the bass part, I don't do the bass part. And I'm just gonna do Western classical music this semester. Second semester, I always have a much more diverse and inclusive body of music. So in case that's any concern. Couple of other things I didn't write on here is that my school district made the understanding with our as MOU with our teachers union that they expect us to not have any more than 2 or 3 hours a week per class of instruction, because they understand that the kids are not coming to class every day. They're home with spotty internet, or 3 little brothers that they have to be babysitting all day because mom's working from home, or they're stuck in the house with their abuser, or they're doing everything from their phone and not a laptop. So we are not allowed to do any more than 2 or 3 hours per week of instruction per class, which I think is really good while we're doing distance learning. So here's my first semester. First week, we're going to do icebreakers, getting to know each other kind of activities, and there's several different online forms we can use for that. The second week, all community building, which I think is very different than icebreakers. Icebreakers really is for me to get to know the kids and get them to be comfortable, but I'm going to have to figure out how to do my choir leadership from in a distance way. So student-led teaching and learning, having the kids figure out who can teach ukulele or guitar, voice, piano, things that are interesting to them. Musicianship tutors, pair up bigs and littles, which is something we normally do anyway, but I think really, really important in the fall. Creating vocal lead tracks or accompaniment tracks could be something that some kids are doing, and the kids will come up with way better ideas than I do. Basically, it's how can they all contribute to the community and staying connected. This next couple of weeks, we're going to do voice classes. Everybody learns an aria or a couple of arias, provide all the backing tracks and everything they need. And at the end of that, have an option for kids to, either like sing it for their family, send in recordings, that kind of stuff. Maybe do things on Flipgrid for the intermediate advanced classes. The kids will be comfortable with that. And then week 5, I'll jump into medieval music and do my famous Hildy lecture. And so the way I'm going to structure this is I'm going to do 1 week that's like me lecturing, providing videos, listening examples, all kinds of stuff, having kids, and we use Canvas, having kids do discussion boards on Canvas about specific pieces of music and stuff. So having them kind of do a deep dive into what the music is and the historical period and some composers and everything, writing about listening to music. And then the next week do music making in that time period. So the next week, maybe I assign a menu of chants the kids could choose from and record solo. And I'm talking about like on their iPhone on a voice memo. That's all they ever have had to do for me this semester, and it's worked out okay for me. That all they have to do is like hold their phone and press the record button and sing. The fact that I haven't required video, even when I've asked for video, I haven't required it, has made things really easy to get for my kids. The kids could write their own chant using like a mantra or something, but for lyrics. I think there's a lot of really great opportunities in there. And start my advanced choirs doing audio recordings of some specific pieces of music that week. And then go into Renaissance music and basically do the same thing. A week of Renaissance music and then a week of Renaissance music making. And I think in each of these weeks where it's the music making weeks, I think it's important to have something where my more experienced kids can do something that serves the newer kids. Do I have kids that are writing music, writing pieces in the style of these historical periods that my first year kids could provide lyrics for, or vice versa. Baroque music making is a great opportunity for the kids. Also do something that may spark some different interests about art and architecture. Classical music, same thing. Provide some lectures, there's some great like TED Ed videos and all kinds of stuff that are really engaging for the kids. And then have them every class do some appropriate piece of classical music that they can do. Romantic music and moving into the modern era and everything. The final week, of course, then that's my 3-year-old. Andrew, baby, I'll be right back. So for the final week, we'll do holiday music or something like that. Do some kind of, I'm going to have to mute myself.
Thank you, Genevieve. Let's see if I can, Jen, if you can still hear me, are you able to unshare screen? I don't know if I can do that. Let me see. Oh, perfect. Genevieve, I think, said she would probably be willing and able to share that out publicly for folks who are interested in that, but I really appreciate that, Jen. Jen asked a question, on Saturday with our conversation. Jen asked this brilliant question of Casey, our high school principal here, asking sort of, if I've got all of these great ideas, like this awesome curriculum that she's put together, when do I start bothering my administrators with this kind of info to sort of be proactive? We've talked the last couple of weeks of these webinars, we've talked about being as proactive as we can and getting out in front of the narrative and making sure that our administrators know that we're not just gonna sort of, oh, well, we can't do choir. We found out this news and now we can't do it. So Casey, will you talk just for a minute or two about that in terms of some advice you gave us on Saturday about sort of sharing some of these awesome ideas that we have curricularly? Oh, she's muted. Oh, unmute. Let's see if I can do it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I had just shared that I think, and I'm not exactly sure on the California schedule, but that most administrators are right now focusing heavily on closing out the year. And there will be a lot more sort of mental and emotional space for talking with teachers over the summer. So I was just suggesting that waiting a few weeks until the school year is closed out and then virtual graduations have happened and evaluations have been written and all of those other things that we do, whole schools do at the end of the year, but we're having to navigate them as different this year. That a great time to meet with administrators is to set up a time this summer so that you do have time to ask them questions, especially if you have asks. If there are things that you're thinking about that would impact the master schedule or would, that you would be asking for different use of classroom space or different things like that, you don't want to wait until August, but getting through the end of this year before you come in with both your ideas and your asks, given a new reality.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Genevieve, one quick question before I turn it back over to Derek Fox, if you're able to respond. Tammy Spurgeon was asking, are you planning to you've got 5 choirs or maybe even more than 5 choirs at Carlmont High School.
There's 5 and then there's 3 a cappella groups. So
will you do that same curriculum with all 5 of your major ensembles?
Yeah, I think it's honestly the only way to manage things, as you can see with the kid that's sometimes turning into Yosemite and sometimes not. It really is the only way to manage things. I think I have, there's a certain level of, so I provide a lecture that's recorded, the kids need to watch, and a couple of YouTube videos, but maybe also to my advanced classes, that's specifically, okay, I also want them to learn about Hildegard von Bingen and maybe they have a little bit more challenging listening assignments and that kind of stuff. But it's also, I think, really important to building the community. I think it helps that they're all doing the same thing. because I've got a first year kid and a senior who maybe the first year kid needs some help or whatever, and they're tracking the same stuff, I think that's really helpful. But that's how I do things normally anyway. The repertoire is always different, the sight reading is different and everything, but we're always working on the same themed content for concerts and everything else, and sometimes for the entire school year. So they're always feeling like they're all in the same boat.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jen. Derek Fox, will you share a little, continuing this conversation about sort of trying to plan for everything and sort of putting that curriculum out there? I think you've got some ideas that you've been collecting.
Yeah, I sure will. I wanted to really quickly and just as briefly as I can share with you 3 different lessons that I put into the collective myself that will meet your needs for students if you need to meet synchronously or asynchronously, and also to help connect with your students at different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, as I try to make it very scary as I come in. Because those are things that we need to be thinking about. The first thing is we play the telephone game in school, right? Where we turn to each other and talk. So one of the ideas that I had was to literally use a telephone. We have students who won't be connected via iPads and computers, but you might decide to create a list of students in an order that they will call each other. You call the first student and you sing a melody to that student. And then that next student sings a melody to the next person on the list. And then it gets all the way to the end and it gets back to you. And then when you meet in your classroom, you analyze how was the melody the same or different than when it started, and where did it change? So each student has to remember what they sang, they could record it. And then you have to play those and try to figure out where it happened. If you're in a position where you're talking about elements of music, maybe once you get through that conversation, each person then has to dictate the rhythm or the melody that was provided to them or sung to them. And again, that has to be differentiated for your room. So someone may have listened to that and heard, I could never do that in my school. Maybe not at that level, but maybe you could do that by tapping a one measure of a very simple rhythm, right? Or you know that that's an activity you want to do, so you spend the first week of classes building up their skill set so that they can participate in that activity. So I'm using that to kind of drive the curriculum in a way that I need to, one, to give me the freedom to kind of be able to pivot how I need to, and it's not overly complicated. The next one that I want to show you is something that people can use if they have access to iPads and things, and can maybe even have access to apps, or if you're thinking about your asks, which is what Dr. Robinson said, maybe having access to this beautiful thing, some of you may know it, called Blob Chorus. Blob Chorus is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Can you see that? I hope you can. It's a wonderful, wonderful pitch matching resource. So what happens is I go in, and I can decide, how many blobs I want to hear. This first blob gives the pitch, and the other 3 gives a pitch that the student has to match. So I'm going to go back and let you hear this one more time. Blob, 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 blob. Now, if you pick one and it's not right, blob. He blobs and he explodes. So you can make that an activity that you do synchronously with your class. You can make teams, split them up, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And one person is up and they have to decide which blob they want to pick. If they get it correct, you go to the next round. If they get it wrong, then you continue to go until they find the correct one. And then if you realize, oh my God, my kids, they don't understand intervals, this is a perfect time to put an intervention in where you talk about singing correct intervals. That could be using solfege. That could also be using songs if you're someone who decides to use that. So the blob course is great. You can pick up to 8 different blobs. Blob, blob, now, if you are, if you are in a situation where your class is pass-fail, where if your administrator has said it's pass-fail, you can't give a grade. So the way I would use that app is I would say you have to, just like we would do a practice log, you have to log 10 minutes on blob course. What child does not want to blow up a blob? My kids love it. And they picked the wrong ones on purpose, unfortunately, but they're 5 and 3, so I can give them a little bit of leeway. And then the last thing is one that I use with my collegiate students. We did Andrea Ramsey's piece, Lineage. And one of the things that I, as teachers and conductor teachers we're going to have to think about is social emotional learning when we get back into the classroom. We're going to have to tend to some students who've just been picked up out of their daily livelihood and dropped into this quarantine situation with stressed adults who are making it one glass of wine a day. I'm just talking about a friend, not myself. So, so basically, one of the things that I did was we did the piece of lineage, but the way that I elevated that to help address the social and emotional learning part, which was this particular part was about relationship building. I asked my students to think of someone in their life who mirrored the strength of the grandmother that's talked about in that particular piece. And then I gave them some interview questions to talk to their, some of them chose grandparents, some of them did not, but what a time for us to help our young people connect with some of our more mature folks who sometimes are not able to touch each other and talk to each other. So now the Zoom looks a little bit different, and maybe some of those students would volunteer to record them for you. And then let's say after that's over, the students who would allow you to show them in the class, you spend a day watching those videos and maybe discussing amongst the students, how they felt about those videos, or just some kind of discussion around that social and emotional learning piece. I did that with my collegiate choir and they loved it. And what we actually did was we took a quote from each one of those parents or each one of those people they talked to, and we used those and we spoke those during the concerts. Now, we won't have concerts, but maybe if you're going to do this virtual choir and you have several, maybe those quotes are what happened in between those concerts. So the students really have ownership, feel like they have some ownership in that process, and they see themselves reflected in the work that you're doing, as opposed to we need to create this virtual choir because everyone else is doing it. The last thing I'll say to you is about virtual choir. I know for me, my collegiate students, I work at a metropolitan college and a metropolitan university, and several of our students work and have students themselves. And so my virtual choir was I call it my virtual singing, was voluntary. But what I also am thinking about in the fall is we will pair with our local high schools. Omaha has several schools. If they need practice tracks, I will engage my students in making practice tracks for other choirs, as opposed to maybe coming up with the virtual choir aspect of it. What's unique about the university is that they don't have to be there. So I can't create things, I have to be strategic about the types of activities and the way that I frame them and the narrative around them so that they continue coming back. Anyhow, I wanted to be sure to share those and give you some ideas that are going into this collective so that you realize they don't have to be the most intricate things. They don't have to be Charlotte's Webs for me to be able to, for us to be able to use it. Really think on a basic level if that's where you're most comfortable, because somebody somewhere is going to be inspired by your work and your willingness to help them be successful as well.
Thank you, Derek. Derek brings up the sort of the virtual choir, or I like that, the virtual singing, because we're not really a choir anymore when we're doing it all separately. But I'm curious because I'm noticing people in the chat have asked this, and I know last week people have mentioned it, and I've been seeing it online a lot. Troy Robertson, would you talk a little bit about some ways that we can use virtual choir not for the product, but for the process? Because I think I know it's somewhat easier for high school or college age students or adult singers to maybe do this, but I know that many of my friends who are middle school teachers and upper elementary school or children's choir directors have expressed concern that kids don't have either the ability to or just the ability to just musically or with devices to be able to really pull off a good virtual choir. And I actually found my adult singers, some of my older singers were very nervous about it, that they just were not thrilled with the idea at all, understandably, because they just were like, I can't hold the phone and record and look at the music, and it's just too stressful. So I know you and Cora Moore have been doing some things to kind of make it a little bit more user-friendly and have it be about process and not product.
Yeah. Well, that's a concern that we've heard expressed a lot as we've gotten cranked up, is that this is easy for college kids, but what about folks who don't have technology, that sort of thing. I think that some of the points that Genevieve raised last time we were chatting about doing activities that are more focused on getting them acquainted with the technology are sometimes good. Mary Biddlecombe and Tucker Biddlecombe also did an activity. They're part of our Coremore group. They're at Vanderbilt, with a children's choir that spanned ages 6 up through high school. And they focused a lot on really step-by-step walking children with their parents through the process. I personally can't speak to the children's choir experience. That's definitely something we're going to be putting a team together to work on. I mentioned Mary Biddlecombe. Emmy Birch is another one who's kind of a specialist and has a lot of experience with children's choir in addition to college students. And so they're going to be working on some of those methods. In terms of community choir, I do have quite a bit of experience with that. And my folks are far from the most skilled. They range from folks who've received Lifetime Achievement Awards in music to they just walked in the door for the first time this semester. And so trying to find things that they can do has been a challenge. Some of the ideas that we're working on, I actually have rehearsal in an hour and 10 minutes, are to treat the warm-up period both as a time to get acquainted with the technology and just to see what is Zoom, what are we doing on Tuesday nights, why are we gathering, but then also a time for skill building, so warm-up as usual. But then the thing that's a little different is to use it as a time so that they can make music synchronously. And so rather than just warming up, it's also a time for them. It's a little uncomfortable for us too, because it means we're a little bit more of a performer when they're all on mute. But them singing with us is way more comfortable for them, for many of them, than singing with a MIDI file. They don't want to do that. They don't want to sing with a guide track. And so singing with you while you're singing. The next step in that process that we're actually going to start tonight with my ensemble is once you've done that for a little bit, you can generate some recordings. And then during your session, you can actually have them sing with themselves. So it is much more like they're receiving the sort of sound of all their peers, and you can use those tracks from previously. Another thing that we've explored doing and we're working on seeing if it can work is during the warm-up, if you're singing a round or a partner song, you can have them actually record while they're in Zoom with you and they're all on mute, and then you can sort of piece that together later to use in later warm-ups. So those are sort of some ideas for that early part of the rehearsal process that are not focused on any sort of a product except a product that can help to augment what you can offer in rehearsal. In terms of, again, kind of focusing on a product, I think Derek kind of hit on this theme a little bit. We have to adjust our expectations to this moment. And it may be that we're accustomed to doing nothing but Bach, cantatas every single Sunday. But for many of us, that was never reality. And now, especially, there's a lot of technical hurdles to overcome. So you may have to just kind of pull back developmentally just a little bit and set your sights just a little lower and focus instead on participation, getting them in the door, having some fun, performing in unison. Again, going back to those earlier modes of independence, like partner songs, rounds, things like that. I've mentioned round a couple times. You may not have connected the dots. A round is perfect for an early experience because all they have to do is sing it correctly one time, and then you can put it together in any fashion you want after the fact. And it's very low pressure. It's an easy way to make a product that they might be excited about. You can play the piano along with it, and they can hear it and go, wow, we really sound great. I didn't know that was going to happen. So it can be a nice surprise for them. So anyway, during the rehearsal process, sort of adjusting and letting different things happen at different times. One of the, Jeffrey, shut me up anytime, because now I'm kind of rolling. One of the other things that we're starting tonight is because I'm generating materials for so many different groups right now, I had the realization today, why am I waiting? I have really enthusiastic students who really want to do stuff. And then I have folks who are scared. Well, the folks who are scared, I can spend time with them. The enthusiastic students, I can just cut them loose on all of this material and say, all right, here are all these songs, cut some tracks and let's hear what you can do, and go ahead and sing. Some of them have already taken that initiative. I have a couple gals who put together a whole arrangement just with the two of them. And so it gives us a whole new way to differentiate when we have asynchronous products that we can generate. And then finally, at the final part of the rehearsal tonight, again, I mentioned kind of singing along. We are going to do some just let's sing these songs. I'm going to share a screen with you, and here's a song. We're going to sing a song. That's not what we normally do in choir. That's not normally what we think of as choir. But part of that effort is to get them feeling connected again as a community, because some of these folks have been singing in my community group for 40 years. This has been a part of 41 years. This has been a part of their life for as long as I've been alive. So getting them to feel like they have that community is really important to me. So that's 5 or 6 ideas, and we've got many, many more. I have some really brilliant collaborators who have all kinds of stuff that they're putting it together. And again, just like Derek is doing, we're going to share all of this with you. And I have the same exact attitude. If it's something that we've done, steal it, take it, and use it for your own. So.
Thanks, Troy. Yeah, Eliza said just in the chat a few minutes ago, and Iris Levine on here as well said, you know, that our singers are, especially our older singers, but I think some of our younger singers too, are just either uncomfortable with hearing their voice heard or just don't want to be a soloist ever. And they look at this like, well, it's only my voice. And as Eliza has pointed out, and I am 100% in Eliza's camp, I do not like singing by myself. I like singing in a choir. I've never been a soloist, and hearing myself recording some of these virtual choirs, because I've put myself in my singer's shoes now and done it as well, and I'm like, this cannot be used for public consumption. Eliza's voice is far superior to mine, so we'll use Eliza twice and Jeffrey 0. But yeah, I love the idea of focusing on the process and really helping handhold some of our singers through this if we decide to do something virtually like this. I think it can be really meaningful. We have just a minute or two left, or 3 minutes left. If you've got a question or two, we can maybe do some quick responses if you want to type them into the chat. But while, oh, Eliza, go for it.
I mean, this is something we could talk about for such a long time, but what I have found most useful as sort of my guiding principle these last 8 weeks, and as I prepare for the year ahead, is how do I structure this strange new choral experience so that years from now, I want my singers to say years from now, wow, choir really helped me get through a terrible time, rather than choir really added a lot of stress to an already stressful time. And that, you know, that what Jeffrey was just talking about in my, I've said many times, like, I would never have chosen to make my life out of choir if I had had to sing by myself very often in my early choir days. I just wouldn't have done it, because choir was the one place where I could be free of the limitations of my body and my self-consciousness, and I could lose myself in the whole. That was something I was good at, and it was something that I related to and enjoyed. And, you know, it's a real challenge right now to find experiences like that. And it's probably going to mean that we're not going to create the greatest art of our careers this next year. But I also think, you know, as I look at some of the, I've read some of the things that have come out of sort of the stages of grieving of choral directors, and these like, well, we could have choir if we have, you know, N95 masks and a wind vane. And, you know, my personal feeling, two personal feelings. One, next year's not going to be a great year for choirs, but I don't know about the rest of you. I have wasted years of my life for much less compelling reasons than this. We will get through this. And I think that one of my greatest gifts that I can give, like, to my college students, is to remind them that 10 or 20 years from now, the year's delay that they and all of their colleagues suffered right now is not going to seem as huge as it does right now. It's going to be okay. And the second thing is, you know, if I have to choose next year, I would rather that my students miss choir than that they dread choir. So my job next year is to create experiences for them that keep them connected to their love of choral music and keep them connected to the insatiable desire to get back to doing it as soon as it's safe to do it again.
If I could just add, not that I could add anything as well-spoken as Eliza ever, but one of the things, and you can see it right now, when I record stuff for my kids, I don't re-record. I send them the first version of the lecture. I send them the first version of me singing. And sometimes that does mean that Andrew runs through the back of the video wearing only a diaper and swinging a toy around. Or that does mean that I completely screwed up the fourth verse or something and had to re-rec and go back. But I've found, first of all, it's very freeing to just be like, I'm recording this, and then bam, it's uploaded. That's humongously freeing. I don't have time to take, you know, make 8, 9 versions of something and pick the best one. There's no time. But I think that's also freed up my kids to, like, when I'm telling them it doesn't have to be perfect, just press the button on your phone, put your earbud in, and just sing along with me. Like, really, it doesn't have to be perfect. I think they believe me because they're not seeing me over edit my stuff. And that's when I'm singing to them, when I'm preparing a lecture and everything. And I think that's been helpful.
I want to say thank you to our amazing panelists today. I really appreciate all of your time. They joined a call on Saturday so we could have a short conversation to get us ready for today, and then they gave up their hour today as well. Thank you from coast to coast. Dr. Casey Robinson joining us from the Washington, D.C. area with some great perspective on how we fit into this crazy time. And Dr. Derek Fox from the middle of the country, Omaha, Nebraska. And from Texas, the great state of Texas, Dr. Troy Robertson, Tarleton State University, and Choral. And of course, our amazing California folks, Genevieve Tepp here in the Bay Area with me, and Eliza Rubenstein down in Southern California. Thank you, all 5 of you. And of course, always thank you to Trish Adams for hosting and organizing this on the back end. I just want to give a shout out. We have 2 more regularly scheduled meetings. Next week's webinar will be another group of 4 or 5 folks, which is going to be amazing. And then June 2nd, because you all asked for it, we're going to have 8 different simultaneous sessions for 8 different areas. So if it's going to be structured, but a more of a roundtable focus, so that people can really feel like they're chatting with their different same types. So there's going to be a 2-year college roundtable, a children and community youth roundtable, a university and college, community choirs and professional choirs, a high school one, a junior high one, a music and worship, and a vocal jazz session. So 8 different roundtables that you can join through. And Trish doesn't know that yet, but she's not going to have to worry about it. I can see her face going, I can't organize 8 Zoom calls at once. But our repertoire and resources folks will each organize 8 different separate roundtables on June 2nd. So I know there's been a clamoring for having the smaller group conversations. And so we've organized that for you for June 2nd. Next week will be the full group again, though. Thank you all so much. Happy Tuesday.